Welcome back to the Buckeye Breakdown Podcast. It is game day. Finally, we've got football here in front of us. We are so excited to cover the Ohio State Buckeyes as they open the season with the Minnesota Golden Gophers. I'm Brendan Gulick along with Andrew Lind. Man, does it feel good to wake up on a game day morning and know that this team has a lot of the pieces in place that they think they can go back out and defend their Big Ten championship, make another run at the college football playoff. There's really nothing like, waking up on game day morning for opening day, and all of the hype is there, obviously, but also a lot of hope that this season will go the way the Buckeyes want it to.
Yeah, and the weather's pretty nice today, too. It really fits, the fall football season. So, it's nice to wake up and there be a game today. And, it feels like it was really just spring practice. And then before that, the national championship. So it really just never ends.
January was, on one hand, an extremely long time ago. And on another hand, maybe it wasn't so long ago. Ohio State and Alabama had the shortest offseason of any team in the country because they played the last game of the year. And it wasn't that long between the start of spring ball after the season had ended. So an awful lot of excitement here as we get rolling to start covering this season. Let's talk Minnesota. This is a really interesting week one matchup. I think we've documented well enough throughout the course of the week over on BuckeyesNow.com that, this team has some talent. This is not a rollover game in the Big Ten to get it started. I don't necessarily expect Ohio State to struggle tonight. I don't think this is going to be a insurmountable challenge, but I do think Minnesota is a darn good team. And considering what they did last year, I think this team is going to be more motivated to play like they did in 2019, where they had an awful lot of the same players 2 years back.
Yeah, it's really easy to forget that, for most of the season 2 years ago, they were undefeated. And a lot of people thought that they were, going to be Ohio State's opponent in the championship. But, they obviously did lose Rashad Bateman at wide receiver. So they're not as talented, maybe as they were offensively 2 years ago. They definitely still returned some key some key players, including the running back who, is the Big Ten's leading rusher last season. So, there's definitely some places where Ohio State is going to have to pay attention. But overall, I don't really expect it to be a really close game, for very long. And, the fact that Minnesota offensively is probably a little bit more one-sided than, you would kind of hope for a season opener, just to kind of get the secondary, used to playing and those kind of things. So, like my prediction was, I believe 49-21. So like I said, it'll be close in the first quarter, but eventually, Minnesota just doesn't have the firepower to keep up.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, especially on the firepower side. I don't know if the game is going to hit the over. I think the over is 62.5. I picked 41-20. I think Ohio State wins a game by 3 touchdowns. I'm not sure that it's the kind of game that Buckeye fans are really sweating over. But with some rain in the forecast, I always think the beginning of the season, the defense might be a little bit ahead of the offense for short stretches. Now, Ohio State absolutely can open it up. They've got, game-changing talent all over the field. You hit one big home run pass or you rip off one big run and all of a sudden the game breaks wide open. I get that. But, you're playing in front of a crowd again. The adrenaline is going to be crazy for these guys in the first quarter. I think there's going to be a significant emphasis on running the ball tonight on both sides. It's Minnesota's strength offensively for sure. And a couple years ago, I'm pretty sure the run-pass breakdown in Justin Fields' first game as an Ohio State quarterback, I believe it was about 65% running. I wouldn't be surprised if we see something similar in terms of a breakdown tonight, just to try to get C.J. Stroud in the rhythm of, being in a game, especially in a road environment.
I think the biggest difference, though, when you look back at Justin Fields' first start, is that they had J.K. Dobbins. So there was a little bit more, what you get, and it's kind of we'll just go as J.K. takes us. And obviously, there's a ton of talent in the running backs room, but I don't know that there's somebody who is necessarily at this point in the season who is that bell cow back who you're going to consistently hand it to all game and then like kind of feed off of him. So, it's kind of one of those things like where Ohio State's strength is right now is in the wide receivers room. So to me, you're going to try to get the ball in their hands more often. So, I see Ohio State throwing the ball a lot more than running it, Minnesota doing the opposite.
Well, there's no doubt Ryan Day's offense the last couple of years has had a pretty huge emphasis on throwing the football. Maybe some of that is because you've got a transcendent quarterback in Justin Fields the last 2 seasons, but even before that with Dwayne Haskins, when Ryan Day was an integral part of building this offense before he was the head coach. I totally agree with you in the sense that the Buckeyes have been one of the elite passing teams in the country the last couple of years. And I hope they take some home run shots. I think it'd be a ton of fun to see, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, and then start to see maybe some of these freshmen. I cannot wait to watch Emeka Egbuka and Marvin Harrison Jr. Get their first opportunities. Julian Fleming was hampered by injury all year last year. By all accounts, he's healthy and looked really good so far, through camp and preparing for this game. So, yeah, without a doubt, I mean, this wide receiver room is loaded, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if Ryan Day is trying to get the ball into their hands. I'm curious how much the forecast will play into it. It's going to rain tonight. The question is, when does it start? There's nearly a 100% chance of rain in Minnesota tonight by like 10 or 11 o'clock. But does it start, at 7 o'clock local time when they kick, 8 o'clock Eastern? Or does that maybe not hit till the second half? How bad does it rain? How hard is it raining? How windy is it? I think some of those, factors might determine how much the Buckeyes want to try to air it out.
Well, and on top of that, just depending on how out of hand the game is at any point too, could play into that, because you're not going to throw the ball a million times in the second half if you have a 3-4 touchdown lead. So, it's just kind of one of those things you want to see how it unfolds, and then once the weather kind of comes in, you make your decisions from there.
Matthew's fired up, says go Buckeyes. Thanks for chiming in and for joining us, Matthew. We appreciate that. And it brings up a good point. If you're listening to this podcast after the fact, we appreciate that. But know that you are able. We stream all of our podcasts live. So if you want to interact with us, if you have questions about the season that you'd like us to address, feel free to join us either on our YouTube channel or on one of our social media platforms on Twitter and on Facebook. You can find Buckeye Breakdown wherever you like to find your favorite podcasts. CJ Stroud, right? It's obviously his first start. Everybody within the building is certainly expressing a ton of confidence in him. The wide receivers was the last position group that we had a chance to meet with at the end of camp. And to a man, everybody that spoke to us basically straight out said CJ Stroud is making our unit better, which is kind of a scary thought. But isn't there an element of you got to prove it? I mean, the guy has only played 8 snaps in his career so far, hasn't thrown a pass. I know that's been beaten over and over and over again. But, now the rubber meets the road. Today counts. Today is day one. And, Ryan Day was pretty clear. You can't lose this game. You have to find a way to come home with a win.
Well, Ryan Day also said this week that, I guess he was more asked about practice than he straight out came and said it. But, practice for Ohio State is most likely always going to be more difficult than the game itself. So, if they're saying that he's performing in practice against Ohio State's defense, practice in and practice out, like I'm not necessarily worried about the fact that he hasn't thrown a pass in a real game, because honestly, where's the benefit saying, oh, well, he threw a pass in a blowout over Rutgers in the fourth quarter versus, he's throwing touchdown passes left and right in practice. Like, I'm not necessarily concerned about that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there is an element of it's a manufactured headline and it's an easy attention-grabbing thing to talk about. But if there's ever a day where that comes up, it's like, hey, today it's game one, it's day one. Let's see what you got. And Ryan Day was very straightforward in saying he does not have plans to play more than one quarterback today. This is CJ Stroud's team and his offense right now. And the only way, based on what Ryan told us on Monday, the only way that Kyle McCord or Jack Miller or anybody else gets in the game is if the game dictates it, not if, it's just, hey, let's go get another guy some valuable game reps. So you're going to see CJ Stroud, theoretically all day. And maybe that's best for him too, right? He's got to get his feet underneath him, because for as big as this week is, next week is maybe even bigger.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to my point about, thinking that they're going to throw the ball a little bit more, because, there is a benefit maybe in handing the ball off and, getting a rapport with your running backs and just knowing, placement and those kind of things. But really, as a quarterback, the thing you want to do and the thing you want to get comfortable with is throwing the ball around and being in those situations. So if it is raining, maybe that is something that, hey, it's raining, the game's out of hand. There isn't necessarily a risk in throwing the ball around a little bit. So, it's wet. Let's try that. And I think that's kind of, just the whole thinking with Ryan Day, wanting him to be in the game the whole time, is, learning different situations and just getting that experience.
I think the other obvious storyline as it relates to the Buckeyes coming in here is that this is, the first time the defense can come out and show that the faux pas of 2020 are in the rearview mirror. The defensive line last year coming into the season was perhaps the one area that was a question mark. This year, it's the unquestioned strength of the defense. The Buckeyes like the talent they have in the linebacker room, but those guys haven't played as many snaps as the Tough Borlands and Pete Werners and Justin Hilliards that you had seen from a year ago. And obviously the secondary has to be better. They had flashes of good play last year, but they were also at times a liability for quarterbacks that could take the top off the defense. Tanner Morgan 2 years ago, threw 30 touchdowns and only 7 interceptions. Now, he did have a better receiving core 2 years ago than I think he does this year, but he's a talented quarterback. I think he's 18-8 as a starter during his career. He owns 11 different Minnesota passing records, either single game or career records already. This kid's good, and I know they like to hand the ball off, but this defense really better be ready to go tonight.
Yeah, Larry Johnson kind of talked about this a couple weeks ago too, and that they won't really be able to get into the rushing package just because of how Minnesota runs the ball so much. So, I don't really expect them to make to make all kinds of plays on the quarterback, just because that's not the style of offense that Minnesota has. But at the same time, this is more speaking for the whole season as the season as a whole. If the defensive ends or the defensive line as a whole is able to get pressure on the quarterback, that's in turn going to help the secondary and linebackers, just because of that pressure. It makes the quarterback make quicker decisions and those kind of things.
Rightful One chimes in on YouTube. It's an interesting name. CJ goes up against our front seven in practice, so I'm confident in him. Am I crazy for thinking he may have a 50 touchdown season? I'm trying to temper my confidence, but I just think this kid is legit. I don't think that's a completely bananas thought. First of all, you've got the full season again, right? Obviously, it's a thought process dictated on his health. He plays in an offense with a guy in Ryan Day that wants to throw the ball, that likes to throw the ball. So I can see why you'd say it from that angle. The offensive line, by all accounts, is one of the best offensive lines the Buckeyes have had in recent memory. Probably going to give him good protection. Obviously, the talent in the receiver room is there. I could certainly see a scenario where C.J. Stroud has a monster season. Does he get to 50? We were probably asking ourselves the same thing when Dwayne Haskins had that kind of a season. I'm not sure anybody really predicted that was going to happen before the season started. But to Stroud's credit, when he's gotten opportunities to shine, he's continued to do that. So I expect him to have a great season. I think it's kind of hard to ever predict a 50 touchdown season from a quarterback, Andrew, but I could certainly see where he has a big year.
Yeah, I mean, if he's throwing 50 touchdowns this year, I'm pretty sure he's going to win the Heisman Trophy, because there's been, I think, 6 quarterbacks ever, including Joe Burrow 2 years ago, to ever throw over 50 touchdowns. So, it's kind of one of those things that's a really high number. And honestly, if Ohio State is throwing the ball that much that he has 50 touchdowns, I'm a little bit concerned about the running backs room too, because that was a lot of the reason that Dwayne Haskins had 50 plus touchdowns that season, was because the running backs, J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber, could really never get a rhythm. The offensive line kind of said that as much as well. Like we had to completely change the offense just because, JT Barrett was more of a, he could throw the ball, he could run the ball, those kind of things. And then the offense was just almost strictly throwing the ball in 2018. So, I don't know that wouldn't necessarily be a great sign for Ohio State's offense and the balance that that they undoubtedly want to have.
I totally agree with you. I mean, Dwayne Haskins put together one of the most memorable seasons in Buckeye history. Obviously, he broke records. I don't think that's what Ohio State wants. I think they liked the balance they had last year, where it was almost split exactly 50-50 on roughly 260 passing yards and 260 rushing yards per game. To your point, maybe they don't have an established bell cow back, but the Buckeyes like the depth they have in the running back room this year, perhaps better than they even liked it when they had guys like Ezekiel Elliott and J.K. Dobbins, because, if Master Teague has a bad stretch, they're going to give the ball to Mayan Williams or to Travion Henderson. I think you're going to see all three of those guys get carries tonight. Travion Henderson, true freshman right away. I'd be really surprised if he doesn't get touches tonight. I know he is in the rotation for guys that, might return kicks. So they're looking for ways to get him on the field. But I agree with you. I think the Buckeyes are much more well-suited if they can prove they can run the football and not have to throw it. Dwayne Haskins was a different kind of quarterback than the Braxton Miller and JT Barrett and Justin Fields mold. Dwayne was much more of a pocket passer and a super, super talented guy. But I think to your point, they kind of had to change the offensive strategy because they didn't have the running threat both in the backfield and with his legs that they did with other guys.
Well, and then once you get into the red zone too, you mentioned Teague and Mayan Williams, like those are big-bodied kids that are going to get the ball in those situations. And, those are going to take obvious touchdown opportunities away from Stroud once you get into that shorter field.
I don't want to make too big a deal of this, but I feel like we have to at least mention it. The Buckeyes are playing in front of a crowd. It's going to be the biggest crowd they've played in front of in 2 years because, even though they played in front of fans, in the Sugar Bowl against Clemson and in the national championship game against Alabama, those stadiums were far from full capacity. I think there was something like 15 or 16,000 people in Miami for the national title game. But they're probably going to play in front of roughly 50,000 people tonight. There will certainly be some Buckeye fans there, but there's going to be a lot of Minnesota fans. I think that probably only comes into play for me in that first quarter where you've got, I don't know if it's butterflies, maybe more just nervous energy about the excitement of the season starting, and you can feel the game day environment. It's a nationally televised game on a Thursday night under the lights. I think maybe that comes into play for the first couple series, but I don't think that's going to really bother the Buckeyes, even though that's something that's being talked about.
Yeah, I mean, really, I only expect it to be Ohio State's first offensive series that it seems to be, different, if that makes sense. But I think really it's just one of those things that it'll become normal very quickly. Like they'll be like, oh, well, this is what it's supposed to be like. Last year was that outlier where it seemed really strange and like, just the energy wasn't there at times because of that. And I think that this is just the complete opposite where like you might see people be over energized, if that makes sense. So, I really don't expect it to play that big of a role. It'll just feel really natural by the time that the second quarter rolls around.
How about the two right tackles we're going to see tonight? You want to talk about two guys that are just like unbelievably large human beings. Dwan Jones for the Buckeyes is far and away the biggest offensive lineman that Ohio State has, and it's a good thing that the defensive ends have had a chance to practice going up against him because Daniel Fa'alele is 6'9", 380 pounds. He's going to play right tackle for Minnesota. I expect Ohio State to try to test his mobility. I think they're going to throw different rotations at him. It's not always going to be Zach Harrison or Tyreek Smith. I think they're going to throw different guys his direction. You can't argue with the natural size and strength that guy has, but how quick are his feet? Can you beat him with a speed rush? I think those are the kinds of things the Buckeyes are going to try to test him with early.
saying ultimately the fact that Ohio State is already going up against its own offensive line in practice, really helps out in that situation, because it's not like it's some big culture shock that he's massive, maybe compared to other teams that they're going to play. So it's just one of those things that at first sight you say, okay, well, this is a big dude, but at the same time, like you mentioned, maybe he doesn't have the mobility, maybe he's not as quick off the snap as you would expect from maybe a smaller tackle. So it's just a matter of excuse me, trying to go and attack him in different ways, and the rest of the offensive line has to block too. So maybe it's not necessarily going up just against him, but finding other weaknesses in the offensive line.
There's a couple of pretty big games around the Big Ten this weekend, and I don't want to do too deep of a dive into scheduling away from the Buckeyes, but it's never too early to start looking at how the college football landscape is, taking shape this particular season. You've got a massive game right out of the gate with Georgia and Clemson, two teams with national championship aspirations. One of them is going to lose the first game of the season. It will likely be a high-quality loss, but it's still going to be a loss. Georgia's a lot of people's pick right now to maybe be the surprise team to, if you want to call them that, to find their way into the playoff. Obviously, Clemson and Alabama and Ohio State, the big storyline from those three. They've all got new starting quarterbacks this year. How is DJ Uiagalelei down in Clemson gonna fare in his first start of the season? But of course, he played last year when Trevor Lawrence had COVID. That's a huge game. In the league, Penn State and Wisconsin is a really, really big game. Alabama's playing Miami right out of the gate. That's a huge game. Miami thinks that they've turned a corner. And then in conference, Indiana and Iowa is a really, really good game out of the gate. So there's some games I think that could really help shape the way we think about college football right out of the chute here.
Yeah, and another one there in the Big Ten is Michigan State at Northwestern. I know that doesn't seem like a game that might not have any big big fallout from it, but Northwestern made the Big Ten championship last year, and Michigan State, I expect them to take a step forward in a real a non-COVID year, if you will, under Mel Tucker, because he obviously is a good coach. He has, a good pedigree behind him, and I think that he'll be able to take a step forward with that program. So if he can go on the road and get a win at Northwestern right off the bat, that would be pretty big.
It would be hard for Michigan State to take a step backwards. I mean, they really, really weren't good last year. And to your point, yeah, and they beat Michigan. And to your point, what do you have with Northwestern this year? I always expect that team to be competitive because I just think Pat Fitzgerald is one of the best motivators in college football. He's an unbelievable coach, and he's so much fun to watch. But they lost basically everything from that team last year. And so, I don't know if their talent level this year will match where it was a year ago, but it's fair to say they've at least got an unproven team. And the last few years, it's basically been some combination of Iowa, Wisconsin, and Northwestern that have controlled the West. Minnesota's been really, really close, but 2 years ago they lost to Wisconsin in pretty convincing fashion in the last game of the regular season, and they didn't even make the Big Ten championship game. So yeah, a school like Northwestern for sure. If they come out and lay an egg, both that's a sign to me that the West might be a little bit more open. But also, if Michigan State can come out with a win, perhaps we look more at Michigan State with some more respect for sure.
Well, the teams that don't have to play Ohio State from the West, obviously, are at an advantage as well, because not to necessarily say Ohio State is going to win every single game, but you won't have a loss on your conference mark, and that helps you obviously in the long game when it comes to winning the West.
To your point, the Buckeyes have beaten every team in their division dating back to 2016 when they last lost to Penn State. So, yeah, it's not a guarantee that the Buckeyes are going to win every game, but the Iowa and the Purdue loss obviously stand out, and Ohio State was certainly favored to win both of those. But if you don't have the Buckeyes on your schedule, your road to Indianapolis is a little bit easier for sure. And I think maybe that's why Iowa this year could have a better season. I know some people are a little down on them. I just have a hard time accepting that. I I just don't think Iowa is going to take a massive step backwards. If they can get through week one and geez, even if they could beat Iowa State, I know that might be a tall order, but if they could beat Iowa State, I feel like that would just rid all of the demons that have been around that program in the offseason. And perhaps Iowa makes another good, strong run. They didn't get off to a great start last year, but boy, they sure finished strong. So they've got some momentum coming into the year for sure.
I do think that Iowa State game will be a key for them, just because, if you look at a lot of predictions around the country, like a lot of people have Iowa State as a dark horse potential, playoff team. I don't necessarily know if I see that just yet, but maybe talk to me after that, that in-state rivalry game, and we might be seeing something different from them.
I'll tell you the other game I didn't mention that I just blanked on for a moment. Notre Dame, Florida State is another big one. I don't know if Florida State is capable of beating Notre Dame, but I'm sure they have Notre Dame's attention. If I'm not mistaken, Florida State has not yet officially named a starting quarterback, and so maybe a little bit of gamesmanship there to try to keep Notre Dame on their toes, preparing for multiple guys. It's already hard enough week one to prepare for a team when you don't have, current in-season film on them. But I would expect Notre Dame to beat Florida State, and I believe that's a big game on national TV too.
Yeah, I mean, I will be interested in seeing who they name the starting quarterback, because that could go a long way in determining just kind of how the offense moves and those kind of things. But it's really not an easy task to go into Doak Campbell Stadium for a night game, regardless of how bad Florida State might be. So I think that game might actually be closer than most people are thinking. And Notre Dame, you got to remember, is also breaking in a new starting quarterback this year, and Wisconsin transfer Jack Cohn. So it's not like they're just returning Ian Book and have all this talent that necessarily led them to a playoff berth last year. So there's definitely going to be some struggle for Notre Dame as well. So if Florida State can take advantage of that could be an upset in week one.
Yeah, for sure. Although good news is Jack Cohn obviously has some legitimate big game playing experience that should help them ease that transition a little bit. The only other thing I wanted to mention here, if folks don't know it yet, the game day status report that the Buckeyes have historically released the day before is now only going to be publicized 3 hours before kickoff. So we don't know yet who made the trip and who didn't. And we will be able to share that with you a couple of hours before kickoff. But Ryan Day did make the comment earlier this week that he does expect the 12 or 13 defensive linemen were going to get on the plane. And I think that's a good sign that the Buckeyes plan to use all of those guys at some point and try to use the rotational depth of that defensive line to their advantage. Minnesota's offensive line is the most experienced offensive line in the country. They've got more combined starts than any other offensive line in FBS football. So even if they might not quite have the same talent level, there is an element of it's the first game of the year. You trust your training, you rely on your experience. And I think, fresh legs for the Buckeyes routinely throughout the course of the game might help wear them down a little bit. So I would expect to see a good rotation on the D-line tonight.
I'd add to that, it'll be nice to not have to look at a status report and just see people who are out and people thinking, that it has to deal with COVID and those kind of things. Like, that doesn't seem to be a concern, at least for Ohio State or, really any other program at this point in time. Just people being unavailable or out because of that. And, it'll really just be nice to not have to deal with that for a year.
Yeah, no doubt. So we will we'll post that on BuckeyesNow.com at what will be 5 o'clock Eastern, 4 o'clock Central Time, 3 hours before kickoff tonight. The game is being televised on Fox. Gus Johnson, Joel Klatt, Jenny Taft will be on the TV call. Of course, you can listen on the Ohio State Radio Network with Paul Keels, Jim Lachey, Matt Andrews, and Skip Mosick. And I believe the game is also on Touchdown Radio nationally. You can check out their website if you're looking for a local affiliate for that one. Andrew, I think you mentioned it earlier, but one more time, your prediction for tonight.
I believe it was 49-21. You obviously have to check the website to make sure that I had that right. So,
all right. So a high scoring game. You're taking the over and the Buckeyes to cover the point spread. I am taking Ohio State to cover the spread 41-20, but I think the under is going to hit 62.5 points. I think it'll be close. Could come down to maybe a missed extra point or somewhere along the way. That'll be another area the Buckeyes are going to have some eyeballs. Ryan Day has not yet named a kicker. He said he's going to go literally right up to the start of the game before deciding whether it's Seibert or Noah Ruggles to take kicks for the Buckeyes this year. So keep your eye on that as well. We have a boatload of coverage for you over at BuckeyesNow.com, all about leading up to the week to get you ready for today's game. And we'll have a ton of stuff throughout the day today and in the days to follow, recapping Ohio State's first game of the season. 132nd season of Ohio State football ready to kick off tonight. And if you're looking for a good omen, Ohio State has never lost a Big Ten opener, 14-0 all-time. See if they can make it 15-0 tonight. For Andrew Lind, I'm Brendan Gulick. The Buckeyes and Minnesota Golden Gophers coming up tonight, 8 o'clock Eastern on Fox. We'll talk to you along the way.